Business Update for December 6, 2022, day 286 of the war and of the date update. So today I'm going to start with, as always, with strategic topics, and we're going to switch to the front line after that. So let's just actually switch. Let's just start with Russia, because the economy is still live there. We can kind of see how things are sort of falling apart. While in Ukraine, it's essentially done. There is not even much to talk about. It's totally dependent on the financial support from the West and in military support. Right? Without that, Ukraine just there's nothing left essentially out of the economy. And essentially, what happens is the only way for majority to survive is to have some income through government, essentially, either you somehow related military or working for government, or government sort of transfers such as pensions and things like that. So, and the rest is just the best way is obviously move west and work there, with exception of men, because they cannot leave really. So that's the situation in Ukraine. Let's actually, as I said, there's not much really to talk about. That is done. Let's talk a little bit about Russia. So nosedive of the Russian economy continues. So Russian state tax revenues from crude oil down 25%, reported by Russian government authorities. Then, in addition, tax revenues in Russian regions are also down, but less, 6.6%. But those sort of revenues are more sort of connected and related to the actually real economy, because crude oil, natural gas is essentially a business of the Russia's leadership, and it's totally centralized at the highest level, fully controlled, versus the regional revenues, tax revenues. They are more reflective of the actual real economy, what's people sort of experiencing on the ground. Then also Russian railroad, say commodity traffic, or basically the amount of the goods that they sort of transferred, went down 4.1% in November. 200 and the number of the sort of commodities that were transported is 103.5 million metric tons. So again, it's down for 4.9%. So as you can see, there's everywhere you look, there are brewing and growing economic problems, basically. Then a little bit more about Russian crude. So now a third of Russian, or 33% of Russian oil tankers, when they sort of sail, you're supposed to turn on sort of recognition system that's basically using radar technology to kind of indicate your port of destination. So they just shut it down, then they don't use it. So everything basically is this in the dark. I mentioned this before. Russia started accumulating fleet of all of this old oil tankers about 2 months ago, and to basically evade this price ceiling that was introduced, and which is really, I would say, is really fake and not really working in any meaningful way. Then actually a little bit more about Russian economy. So, for example, Russian auto sales for 11 months, so basically January through November, is 548,000 cars, and also commercial sort of passenger cars as well. The number in November is actually 46,000, and in October it was 45,000. So just for the reference, in the good times, Ukraine, this roughly means 600,000 annual sales. So it used to be that Ukraine would actually that would be the size of Ukrainian auto sales market. And as you can imagine, Russia is at least 3.5 times larger just by population, right? But in terms of sort of economic wealth, it's also much higher than Ukraine. So more people can afford generally buy cars there. But as you can see, the market really shrunk to the best days of Ukrainian basically market. Then another sort of news about Russia, and if you remember, Russia has basically railroad lines that connect Russia to China, and if you remember, they have the throughput is too small to carry what's necessary, basically, or I would say to support switch of Russian economy towards east, towards supplying China as opposed to supplying Europe. So a Russian president is sort of in manual fashion now deciding which sort of goods are going to will have priority being transported on these two railroad lines. So there was sort of two competing sort of kinds of goods. One is coal that goes to China, and the other one is containers, which is basically what this really means is more value added goods, right? Equipment and things of that nature. So he single-handedly decided that okay, the container traffic will have priority over the coal traffic, which in this case it's probably correct decision, but it's just kind of amazing how it becomes in that the president decides that you need the involvement basically of the president to figure out what's going to have priority in the economy. And economy, this is like total dictatorship. It's literally military economy. That's what it is, and he cannot know all of the right choices, and he will not be able to make all of the right choices in the right time. So eventually, the economy will start to collapse because it's a living organism, and it cannot be just sort of controlled to the point of suffocation, how it's being done right now. Now let's switch a little bit away from one last thing is Russia now started selling its wheat, its grain. So it sold first. So it's first Russian sale of grain to Pakistan. So as you can see, Pakistan now buying also Russian crude, petroleum products, and also wheat, probably at some steep discount. Also, one more about Russian energy. So it turns out that Russia is supplying 13% of the Europe's LNG supply. So it's not just US. So you can see Russia is still supplying 13% of LNG. So again, all of this sort of sanctions and all of that really doesn't quite work. Let's put it this way. And to prove that it doesn't work is so now Hungary is sort of experiencing shortages of fuel there, basically gasoline and diesel and so on. So, for example, 70 filling stations are completely empty. The largest sort of national oil company there is called MOL in Hungary, and basically people started sort of buying and hoarding in expectations of these things developing, which makes things worse. But it's totally sort of natural and normal reaction of everyone to protect his or her self-interest. So this is expected, and sort of it's from a perspective of individual, it's completely rational behavior. So again, Hungary is experiencing the shortages. Then similar situation in Poland. There are shortages, but this time the shortages of coal. Price went up significantly. Some sources report like up to 4 times. Um, the Poland is burning basically coal at large. Russia used to supply 50% of Polish coal sort of demand. Now it's switched to, let's say Colombia, South Africa, which is more expensive, and in general it's more expensive because less Russian coal in the market makes things more expensive. In general, doesn't matter because it's one, one big market, and that's what all of these politicians, I would say, they do understand what, that, but they just have their own sort of agenda that they're pushing, and then they basically create these artificial shortages with these policies that they implement. But the sort of bad thing out of all of this is actually that Poland starting to burn lignite. What it is it's it's a kind of brown coal. They actually called like a young sort of, let's say, portion of the brown coal. So if you can think how the coal is sort of being created in nature, it's basically trees. They lay, in the ground or underground under pressure, long time. Initially, they kind of like a roll there, and then they turn eventually into the black coal. But the process is obviously over time. They start with, you know, sort of brown, then become more brown, they become more dry, and so on. Eventually, they get to this black stage, which is the has most calories per volume, right? But they start with this sort of called like young brown coal, which is called lignite, and so it has a lot of moisture in it. So when you burn it, it doesn't produce much energy. Basically, it's like extremely low quality brown coal. There is another problem. So you need to burn a lot of it, create a lot of toxic fumes. And if you remember, I showed the map yesterday, and you saw Poland was nearly black, as the same as Germany. But I think the situation in Poland is actually worse than in Germany, because the entire country is burning now this lignite, and it creates pretty bad pollution problem there. So again, this is this result of all of this misguided policies that sort of technically saying, oh well, we want to clean environment, but what they actually practically mean is horrific pollution in the end. And there is an even more sort of twist that it's really even worse. That first of all, lignite has more sulfur in it, and for whatever reason, there is also mercury there. And for those who don't understand, mercury is super dangerous, toxic, or in simple way, toxin. Which in simple way, it's poison. Even in small, quantities, creates horrific neurodegeneration. It's like totally, worst of the worst of the terms of poisons. So now all that stuff goes up in the air and poisons basically people there. So again, this is a result of all of this wonderful policies. Then going back now to another country, another example in Europe, which is Netherlands. So politicians there, in their infinite wisdom, decided to also put basically a cap or price ceiling on the prices of natural gas there to better basically they say to better control prices, so prices don't go as high. This is actually guarantees. This is like, I would say this is a guarantee that there will be shortages of natural gas, which will create black market, and the prices will go through the roof, and it actually will hurt sort of average person and people who are sort of at the bottom of the social pyramid, because that's always hurts, least capable of sort of surviving in the society at large. So again, this is populism and its finest. I'm sure that these politicians understand what they're doing. This is at the same time, if people accept it, they will do it. That's just how it works in the world of politics. So now let's switch a little bit from all of this glooming doomy situation with energy, which in Europe, as you can see, is terrible. There is no even attempt to resolve it or go in the right direction. So this whole thing continues, and the more it continues, the worse things get eventually, until people decide to change the course. Now let's a little bit switch and talk a little bit about Asia or China, that part of the world, or Far East, we can call it that way. So first of all, since World War II, Japanese fighter airplanes F-15s landed in Philippines, and they're basically exchanging their sort of military experiences with Philippines military, essentially Air Force, right? So this is basically it's like a training for the future war where they could cooperate together and interact as one system, basically. And this also means that Philippines probably going to be on the west side in potential war in China. Well, with China. That's probably a better way to say it. And very likely that Philippines is going to be battleground, similar to how it used to be during World War II. Then there was also a meeting between US, Australian, and UK sort of group that was sort of discussing military preparedness and how to improve Australia's military preparedness. And I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, there is decision that Australia needs nuclear submarines. Don't really quite understand that military logic there. It honestly, on a surface, doesn't make much sense. But for whatever reason, it's being pushed in that direction. Also, a little bit of going back to the West and inflation and all of this misguided, I would say criminal energy policies. So they create a lot of inflation, and then it creates a lot of sort of discontent, social discontent. So examples is, if you remember, I spoke about the U.S. Workers in the U.S. Railroads that were threatening with strike. What happened is that U.S. Parliament passed the law that essentially prohibits that. So kind of like forcing them, in a way, I guess, work for it's a forced like work to extent you can say it's a slavery, right? Because you're forced to work for less money than you can charge if you were free, essentially, right? So so that's one thing. And then in the UK there is also threat of this large strikes by various governmental employees or infrastructure employees. Again, this is all because of the inflation, right? Inflation, destroys income, destroys purchasing power of people, and they become sort of more of them becoming more desperate how to survive in this difficult situation. And that's another reason why Federal Reserve will have to continue to keep, well, first of all, raise interest rates and also keep them at that level for quite some time, because the system is basically getting out of control because of all of this deglobalization that's happening, sort of separation between China, Russia, Iran, and the West, and it basically globally reduces supply of everything, right? So then the cost of everything, the reverse of it, is the cost of everything goes up, right? And so the the quality of life goes down for everyone, and it obviously does not affect everyone in the same way. People, again, at the bottom of the social pyramid, they get hurt disproportionately by all of this. So then, that's why you have all of this you know strikes and so on. And as things kind of progress in this negative situation, there will be more sort of social discontent. Then also, want to mention about Brazil. It's sort of, I never talk about it, but it's very interesting uh, sort of information. So Brazil military actually went to favelas and killed leaders of narco cartel called Comando Vermelho, which translates as a Red Command. So basically, they apparently some kind of like left, sort of leaning narco cartel. The more interesting part about this is actually this the narco cartel is supporting Lula da Silva, who claimed, I think it's I cannot even say if he is right now current Brazilian president on the or Bolsonaro is, but basically they support Lula da Silva, who, as everybody knows, is pretty corrupt politician. So it looks like part of his support base is actually coming from this narco cartels in Brazil, and apparently military is more on the side of the Bolsonaro, from basically based on this sort of small situation. That's apparently what's going on in Brazil. Not that it's going to affect everyone in a major way, um, but it's just interesting. It's a large country, anyways. The only way it can affect the world is obviously because Brazil is a huge agriculture producer, right? If something happens, that's definitely will put the world in extremely difficult situation. Now let's switch to Ukrainian situation, and first I would just want to quickly update on the energy supply. Things are remain um, difficult and bad. The most difficult situation is in Kiev region, and Kiev specifically, because it was the target of the most of the attacks. Then Zhytomyr is heavily affected. Chernihiv, uh, Sumy region, Kharkiv, also in the south. Russia recently targeted, I mentioned, Odessa. So there were again attacks on the 6th. The attacks were not sort of strong. They also were not focused. Some of them were hitting more military sort of targets. So again, the whole distribution power grid is basically on the edge of collapse. It's just there's another large strong attack, what similar to what we experienced in December. It will definitely finish it off. Now let's actually switch to the front line. We're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, as always. So along the state border, situation is somewhat more elevated. Still not sort of like not what used to be in, let's say, September and October. There are Ukrainian side is using those I think old Soviet kind of like reconnaissance airplanes, that jet airplanes. I think it's like two something. I don't forgot what it is. Basically, they modernized and then being used to attack Russian military air bases that hold this 295s and those strategic bombers, essentially, that being used to attack Ukraine. Some of those attacks, is probably you've seen, were successful. Now let's switch to the actually front line. I'm gonna start with North Luhansk. Things here are essentially without changes. there was some relatively small Ukrainian attack against Kuzemivka that did not lead to anything. No major Russian attacks. As I said, at this point, this whole front line is basically, you know, settling in, and there is not much activity. And as Russian side will get more troops here, there will be more action. There's, as I said, there is a potential for offensive, Russian offensive, sometime more likely in January. Also, there was spotted up to 200 T-90 tanks, brand new ones, here on this front line. It's unclear if they're going to be used on this front line, but basically they were sort of moving to the front line. So it could be a sign of this preparation to the Russian offensive that might be happening sooner than later. Let's put it this way. And as you can see, this is not going to be something weak or something small. It's going to be pretty strong because, I mean, while T-90 is still, I would say, T-72, just a little bit better. There's no essential difference there. Nevertheless, this is relatively new tanks. They're in better condition and everything. A little bit, more sort of battle capable than standard T-72s, but the more important that the large number of those, right? It's just reminds a little bit sort of more like a World War II type of approach when you have the tank thrust to just breach the defenses and then start moving through the enemy's rear and attempting to create encirclement. So this kind of reminds that. We'll see if this is going to be used that way, but it's becoming more and more clear that Russian side is preparing for some kind of offensive. Not clear on this front line, section of the front line, or somewhere else, but it's sort of in the works somewhere. Now let's move south. Let's see what Wagner mercenary is doing on North Donbass front line. Things here somewhat similar. Russian attacks. It was somewhat quieter. I'm not saying it's quiet, but there were fewer numbers of the Russian attacks, as you can see, but typical areas. So Dar, Bakhmut. These attacks in Bakhmut here are just to keep Ukrainian side engaged. This is not where Russian side is how Russian side is hoping to capture Bakhmut. As I mentioned, they probably would like to use this salient here, but more importantly, they made quite a bit of progress in the south here, and this is where they're going to be trying to exploit this initial, well, not initial, this success that they achieved, even though they paid very dear price. But as I mentioned before, from the Russian command perspective, they happy to sort of exchange this lives of the prisoners for Ukrainian soldiers. It makes sense for them. So as you can see, there were some, specific attacks out of Kurdyumivka. They basically want to clear up this whole area, including Tishivka, but it's probably going to take them a while before they get there. Now let's look at central Donbass front line. Things here were pretty quiet. The only attack was out of the area, this salient north of Avdiivka. Sort of unclear why it was sort of quiet. Maybe just some kind of regrouping, just temporary situation. I don't think that there is really a change here in terms of Russian command plans, because the main driver here is basically push Ukrainian front line as far as possible from Donetsk, because it's essentially Donetsk is the sort of capital of the Russian occupational forces. So they just want to push Ukrainian forces as far as possible from there. Now let's finish with Zaporizhya front line, which is, as always, sleepy. When it will wake up is at this point very unclear. Could be sleepy for quite a while, unless I think Russian side decides to launch offensive here, which I would say possible, generally speaking. Um, but at the same time, if you really look at this whole situation, there is obviously this North Donbass where Russian side is actively trying to sort of find solution here, and then the also kind of burning area is this, west of Donetsk, central Donbass front line. So those are more likely to be areas of future offensive, as opposed to North Lugansk and Zaporizhia. Even though Zaporizhia is probably more likely because if they are successful, they can either go and try to capture Zaporizhia, or they basically try to create this encirclement, or at least push Ukrainian troops out of the remaining Donetsk region area. Um, I'm very skeptical that they will be successful. If you remember, they tried to do this southern pincer in April of this year. They were not successful. They you know had many more resources, especially in terms of equipment at that time. So, and they were not successful. It's even less likely that they're going to be successful this time. But I'm pretty sure that was, let's say, 99% that they will try nevertheless. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.